For centuries, it has been an object of devotion and a scientific impossibility. A single 14-foot length of linen cloth in Turin, Italy, bears the faint, haunting image of a man. This is, of course, the Shroud of Turin. For generations, believers have held it as the sacred burial cloth of Jesus of Nazareth. Skeptics, on the other hand, have dismissed it as one of the most clever forgeries in human history. But this isn't just a story about faith versus skepticism. This is an investigation into a scientific enigma that has only gotten deeper with every attempt to solve it. The story kicks off not in antiquity, but in 1898, when an amateur photographer named Secondo Pia was allowed to photograph the shroud. When he developed the glass plates in his darkroom, he recoiled in shock. On the photographic negative, the faint, sepia image was transformed. A clear, detailed, and majestic positive portrait of a man appeared, seemingly out of nowhere. This discovery, that the image on the cloth behaved like a photographic negative centuries before photography was even invented, was the first sign of a looming scientific earthquake. That was over a century ago. Today, the Shroud of Turin is at the center of a new scientific firestorm. Beyond the initial shock of its negative properties, modern analytical tools have uncovered layers of information embedded in its ancient fibers. This data is so precise and so baffling that it challenges our understanding of how the image could have possibly been formed. Some researchers, after years of study, have been forced to consider possibilities that stretch the known limits of science. This is the story of how a single image is forcing a profound re-examination of what we think is possible, and why the mystery of the shroud is more complex and compelling today than ever before. The modern scientific saga of the shroud really begins in 1978. For the first time, the Vatican granted extensive, direct access to a team of credentialed scientists. This group, known as the Shroud of Turin Research Project, or STURP, was a multidisciplinary team of physicists, chemists, and imaging specialists. They were given 5 days, 120 uninterrupted hours, to perform a battery of non-destructive tests on the cloth. Their mission was simple: figure out what created the image. The team arrived with crates of advanced equipment, from infrared spectrometers to X-ray fluorescence scanners. Many were skeptical, assuming they'd quickly identify the pigments or methods used by a medieval artist. But what they found was far more puzzling. After 3 years of analyzing the data, the STURP team reached a formal conclusion in 1981. Their report stated that they found no pigments, paints, dyes, or stains responsible for the body image. There were no brush strokes. One of their most startling discoveries was how incredibly superficial the image is. The coloration sits only on the very topmost fibrils of the linen threads, penetrating to a depth of mere micrometers. While STURP concluded this wasn't the work of an artist in any conventional sense, it's important to know that several researchers have since proposed and tested naturalistic methods to replicate these features, like using a bas-relief and chemicals or primitive photographic techniques, though none of these replications are universally accepted as a perfect match. What about the blood? STURP researchers reported results consistent with the presence of blood components like hemoglobin and albumin. This seemed to contradict the theory that an artist simply used pigment to fake the wounds. However, this is still a point of fierce debate. One of the team's own microanalysts, Walter McCrone, strongly disagreed, arguing the red areas were mostly iron oxide, basically pigment. Another claim from some STURP members is that the image doesn't exist under the bloodstains, suggesting the blood was on the cloth before the image was formed. This is a crucial point for authenticity proponents, but it's based on limited sampling and remains disputed. In fact, a 2018 forensic study argued that the bloodstain patterns are unrealistic and inconsistent with how blood would flow from a crucified body, suggesting they were painted on. So STURP set out to solve a mystery, but instead, they made it infinitely more complex. They ruled out the most obvious answers, leaving a much harder question: if not a painting, then what is it? For a decade, the mystery deepened. Then, in 1988, came what was supposed to be the final word. The Vatican authorized a radiocarbon dating test to determine the linen's age. A small swatch was cut from a corner of the shroud, and divided among 3 of the world's top laboratories in Oxford, Zurich, and Arizona. The results were announced with global fanfare. With 95% confidence, the labs dated the linen to between 1260 and 1390 AD. The conclusion seemed inescapable. The shroud was a medieval artifact. It couldn't possibly be the burial cloth of a man who lived in the 1st century. Case closed. The headlines declared it a fake. For many, that was the end of the story. The 13th-14th century date remains the dominant position in mainstream science. Yet for some scientists, including members of the STURP team, the carbon dating result just didn't add up. It seemed to contradict a huge amount of other physical and chemical data. Almost immediately, critics began to scrutinize the 1988 test. A major concern was the sample itself. The swatch was taken from a single location on the cloth's edge, an area known to have been handled extensively. And if this content blesses you and you'd like to support our mission, you can buy me a coffee or give a super thanks. Every contribution helps us create more content to inspire and uplift others. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on my future. Prepared by nuns after a fire in 1532. One prominent, though contested, critique came from STURP chemist Raymond Rogers. He argued that the sample location was a medieval patch, expertly rewoven into the original cloth. His chemical analysis, published years later, suggested the sample area contained materials not present elsewhere on the cloth, potentially skewing the date. Other speculative theories emerged, suggesting that contamination from bacteria or smoke could have added newer carbon, making the cloth appear deceptively young. However, most radiocarbon specialists consider it unlikely that such contamination could shift the date by over 1,000 years. While the debate continues, and though some commentators have noted the test may not be the final word, the journal Nature, which published the study, has never retracted it. The carbon-14 test, intended to be the final chapter, had instead become just another contested clue. The sheer volume of conflicting data is staggering. On one hand, you have a radiocarbon date pointing to the Middle Ages, which most of the scientific community stands by. On the other, a host of physical properties that seem to defy medieval forgery. What do you think is the more compelling piece of evidence? Let us know in the comments, and if you're finding this investigation as fascinating as we are. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss what's next. For decades, the battle lines were drawn around that 1988 carbon dating. But in April 2022, the case was blown wide open by a team of Italian researchers from the National Research Council. Led by Dr. Liberato De Caro, they used a novel dating method called wide-angle X-ray scattering, or WAXS. Instead of measuring carbon isotopes, the WAXS method measures the natural degradation of the linen's cellulose structure over time. As linen ages, its molecular chains slowly break down. By calibrating this decay against linen samples of known ages, De Caro's team created a new way to estimate a fabric's age. They applied this experimental technique to a fiber taken from the shroud. The results were astonishing. They compared the structural degradation of the shroud's fiber to other ancient linens, including a sample from the Siege of Masada in Israel, dated to between 55 and 74 AD. The study, published in a peer-reviewed journal, found that the agging of the shroud's linen was fully compatible with the 2,000-year-old Masada sample. This new X-ray dating method suggests the shroud could indeed be from the 1st century, completely contradicting the 1988 results. However, this new finding is far from settled science. The WAXS method is experimental, and its reliability is still being assessed by the broader scientific community. It has not been accepted by radiocarbon experts as overturning the 1988 results. Still, it represents a significant, independent piece of data that puts the age of the shroud squarely back in question. Beyond the dating controversy, the physical evidence on the cloth presents its own set of challenges to the forgery idea. Let's look at 3 key pieces of evidence that have baffled investigators. First, the blood. As mentioned, some studies suggest it's real blood, with some highly debated claims that it's type AB and contains high levels of trauma markers. But other forensic studies disagree entirely, with one 2018 analysis claiming the patterns are unrealistic, suggesting they were painted on by an artist. Second, the pollen. In the 1970s, Swiss criminologist Dr. Max Frey took sticky tape samples from the shroud's surface and claimed to have identified pollen from dozens of plant species. While many were from Europe, he also reported several species native to the Middle East, specifically the Jerusalem area. Proponents argue no medieval European forger would have known to embed these specific pollens, but this evidence is highly controversial. Critics have slammed Frey's methodology for a lack of controls and the high potential for contamination over centuries. In fact, some botanists who later examined Frey's work concluded his identifications couldn't be reliably confirmed. Finally, and perhaps most inexplicably, there's the 3D information. In 1976, physicists John Jackson and Eric Jumper took a photo of the shroud to a lab with a VP8 image analyzer, a device used by NASA to map topography. The VP8 interprets brightness in a 2D image as vertical height. When they put in a normal photo, they got a distorted mess. But when they used the photo of the shroud, a near-perfect, anatomically correct 3D relief of a human body emerged. Somehow, the image intensity on the cloth is encoded with distance information. The darker the image, the closer that part of the body was to the cloth. While later work has shown that other images with specific shading can produce 3D-like effects, the clarity and consistency of the shroud's relief remains striking. This 3D property, more than almost any other, defies easy explanation by conventional artistic methods. This brings us to the ultimate question. If it's not a painting, not a simple scorch, and not a photograph, how was the image formed? This is where the evidence pushes science to its very edge. The unique characteristics, its extreme superficiality, the 3D information, and the negative image properties have led some scientists to propose a pretty radical hypothesis. The image was created by a short, intense burst of radiation. In 2011, researchers at ENEA, Italy's National Agency for New Technologies, Energy and Sustainable Economic Development, published the results of a 5-year study. They tried to replicate the shroud's image and found that a powerful burst of ultraviolet vacuum radiation delivered by high-power excimer lasers could create a linen discoloration that was strikingly similar to the image on the shroud. The ENEA team estimated that creating a full-body image with these properties would require an immense burst of radiation, billions of watts of VUV light, a power output far beyond the capability of any known source in medieval times or even today. Now, this radiation hypothesis is just that, a speculative model, not a proven fact. Mainstream science does not accept it as the explanation. Yet it remains one of the few theories that even begins to account for the bizarre physical properties of the image. So where does this leave us? We have an object that science cannot definitively explain. On one side of the ledger, a 1988 radiocarbon test, still considered the dominant scientific evidence, points to a medieval origin. Supporting this are historical records that first document the shroud in the 14th century, along with a bishop's letter from 1389 denouncing it as a painted forgery. On the other side, we have a growing file of puzzles, chemical analyses that find no paint, an image so superficial it seems to defy artistic reproduction, a new, though experimental dating method that places the cloth in the 1st century, and above all, an image encoded with 3D information that points toward a formation process we just don't understand. The Shroud of Turin hasn't shattered modern science by breaking its laws. Instead, it has shattered our scientific arrogance. It presents a set of data that stubbornly refuses to fit into any easy box. It pits one set of data against another, creating a genuine scientific mystery. Every time science seems to have an answer, the Shroud asks another, more difficult question. Is it a medieval forgery of unparalleled genius, using techniques we still can't replicate? Or is it an ancient artifact that recorded an event so unusual it left behind physical evidence that continues to mystify science 2 millennia later? The case file on the Shroud of Turin remains wide open, and its silence is, perhaps, the most powerful statement of all.
This book is your beginner's guide to understanding Scripture. Find peace, build relationships, and discover purpose in today's world. Ready to decode the Bible? Find Bible Decoded available on Amazon now.
If this content blesses you and you'd like to support our mission, you can buy me a coffee or give a super thanks. Every contribution helps us create more content to inspire and uplift others. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on my future videos.